For 12 years, I pretended not to know what they said behind my back. When I finally spoke, it was in front of the notary, and, with $11,300,000 0 cents at stake. I set the delicate porcelain plate in front of my daughter, its edge barely brushing the fine lace cloth. The golden chandelier above shimmered like distant stars, and I took a slow breath of the aroma of roasted vegetables and aged cheddar. I had spent hours preparing this meal, imagining her laughter, the warmth of family gathered for one simple, loving evening. Then suddenly I heard her voice. "You smell like a damn barn wrapped in sweat. Even the hired help seems more refined than you. You are trash in our luxurious home." Her words crashed into me like hot embers, and the chandelier's glow blurred. The guests hovered as if I had turned into wallpaper, present but invisible. My hands trembled. My heart felt like it split in two, and yet I did not flinch. I did not retreat. In that frozen moment, I remembered that for 12 years I had pretended not to know. The whispers behind closed doors, the crushing remarks disguised as jokes, the way I was edged toward irrelevance. I had lived through it with a quiet endurance, telling myself that love required patience, but love has no place for contempt. Before we continue, if justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far beyond the basement. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. Still, her voice cut through again. Do you even realize how pathetic that sounds? Watching you shuffle around, cooking meals we don't appreciate. We built everything without you, and you keep clinging. You are old. You're worn. You're optional. I folded my fingers together, steadying myself as the world spun a little slower. Those words, optional. That was her final verdict. My vision cleared. I could smell the roast beef, the laughter still hovering despite the chill of her words. But I felt no flame of anger. Instead, I felt something solid settle inside me. Resolution. I rose from the table with trembling calm, ignoring the gasps and murmurs. Each step toward the hallway echoed in the hush. I opened the door to my bedroom, hands trembling, not from fear, but from determination. Beneath the bed lay a plain wooden box, hidden years ago, gathering dust. My pulse thundered as I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in velvet, were the investments I had quietly made. Stocks bought on the day her eyes first lit up at the thought of going to college. The estate documents and subtle paperwork I had arranged after selling a modest parcel of land when prices soared unexpectedly. And the prototype plans for a new redevelopment project I had bankrolled, shaping things while remaining silent. Over the years I had invested quietly, each small betrayal planting a seed. I sold an acre when the market spiked, bought stocks in a small tech company that bloomed, and let my land lease out for renewable energy. No one ever asked about my accounts. No one ever cared. And so I built, silently, into millions. Not to reward cruelty, but to remind myself I was still capable of creating something meaningful, even if it wasn't love. I closed my eyes and pressed my fingers to those papers. And they'd never asked what I was doing in silence, but one day they'd find out, because this wasn't charity, it was preparation. And if they thought they could cast me aside without consequence, if they thought silence was weakness, they had not accounted for a woman who knew precisely when to speak, and where. They had not met me today. There was a time when the whole town cheered my name. I still remember the scent of hay and homemade lemonade in the summer air, the ribbons tied into my hair with my mother's trembling hands, and the way my boots clacked against the wooden stage at the county fair. "Nebraska Farm Queen, 1961, the announcer boomed, and the little crowd of neighbors and classmates rose to their feet. I wasn't crowned for beauty, not in the usual sense. My nails were chipped from helping fix the tractor. My smile was crooked. But I had driven the longest plow route, raised a litter of orphaned calves, organized the most successful pie auction for the local orphanage, and read bedtime stories at the children's hospital twice a week. They didn't vote for a face. They voted for grit. And in those days, grit was something you wore with pride. When my daughter was born, I named her Lily, after the white lilies that bloomed in the backyard after my first real harvest. I thought she would inherit the soil in her hands and the sun in her laughter. And for a time she did. As a child, she used to help me knead bread and gather eggs. She'd call me Queen Mama when we wore aprons together. She loved to ride the tractor with me until she was old enough to notice we didn't have what other kids had. It started slow. She began asking why her shoes weren't name brand. Why couldn't we just buy bread instead of baking it? Why we never went on vacations like the other families. I told her the truth. Because we are building something better, baby. Something that lasts longer than credit card happiness. She didn't understand. Not then. Maybe not ever. One spring, the roof started leaking. I had two options: dip into the emergency savings or leave it until the fall. The problem was, there was this dog. He had been hit by a truck just outside town, dragging his legs behind him, whimpering through broken teeth. No one claimed him. He had mange and smelled like death. I should have walked away, but I couldn't. I brought him home, named him Banjo, and spent nearly everything I had on getting him surgery. I slept beside him on the kitchen floor for a week. When Lily came home from school and saw the empty envelope where the roof fund had been, she asked, "What happened?" I smiled and pointed to Banjo, who wagged his tail with a soft thump. "He happened." She stared. Her jaw twitched. "You spent the roof money on a mutt? You was dying." "So am I, Mom. I'm dying of embarrassment every time someone sees our shingles falling off. Every time I have to lie about why we don't have air conditioning or why I wear off-brand shoes. But you'd rather save a pile of fur than take care of your daughter?" "I did it because it was right." "No, you did it because you wanted to feel noble. You'd rather feed garbage than face your failures." She stormed out, and I remember the way Banjo licked my fingers like he knew I needed it. That night, I cried in the barn. Not for the words she said, but because deep down, I knew she meant them. I had always told myself that love would win, that when Lily grew older, she would understand the choices I made, the trade-offs, the sacrifices, that she'd see the late nights stitching clothes so she could have school dance outfits, the way I sold my mother's jewelry to pay for her driver's ed, that she'd remember the times I went without so she wouldn't. But time passed, and she didn't remember. Or maybe she remembered what she wanted. By the time she turned 20, she had reinvented herself completely. Makeup, suits, real estate ambitions, and new friends who didn't know what a corn silo was. When people asked about her background, she said, "I'm from out near Lincoln." Never, "My mama's a farm queen who still makes bread from scratch." I stayed quiet. When she came to visit, I made her favorite apple tart, even when she left it untouched on the table. I ironed her clothes when she forgot. I gave her my car when hers broke down, and took the bus for 4 months so she could get to her internship on time. When she got married, I offered to help with the dress. "I don't want it to look homemade," she said. "No offense." None taken. I stitched a handkerchief instead, white silk with her initials sewn into the corner in gold thread. She left it on the hotel nightstand after the reception. And yet, I kept loving her. People said I was a fool. They weren't wrong, but what they didn't see was what love feels like when it's quiet. When it doesn't announce itself with fireworks, but shows up anyway, with bread at the door, with arms that stay even when you're invisible. 12 years. That's how long I let it continue, the polite insults, the parties I wasn't invited to, the family gatherings where I was seated in the kitchen with the caterers, the looks, the snickers, the way her husband would say, "Don't worry, she won't understand," right in front of me, as if I had gone deaf, or worse, dumb. And maybe for a while, I had. Maybe grief turns you silent, not because you're weak, but because you're saving your voice for the right moment, because when you finally decide to speak, you'll be heard. So I waited. I folded every insult like a letter I would reread someday. I banked every moment of being overlooked, underloved, and quietly betrayed, because I knew the day would come when they would gather, expecting a gift, and I would be the one holding the pen. It took me 3 days to make them. Soft chestnut leather, stitched by hand with the kind of care only a mother could offer. The kind you cannot buy in stores, not even the designer ones my daughter worshipped. The soles were padded with leftover lamb's wool from an old coat, and the edges were reinforced with double thread to keep them strong, season after season. They were simple, yes, but elegant in their own right, and I made them for her. Only her. She had just returned from a business retreat in Aspen and complained about how cold the tile floors were in her new house, so I thought, maybe these would help. Maybe it would be a small bridge back to something warmer between us, a quiet reminder that I still listened, that I still remembered. That morning I placed them just under her chair at the breakfast table, the way I used to when she was little. She had not yet come downstairs. Her husband scrolled through his phone. Her 2 boys, my grandsons, slouched over cereal bowls. I made eggs. No one asked me to, but I made them anyway. When she walked in, I smiled. "Look under your chair, sweetheart." She frowned, pushed the chair back and looked. Her face tightened. "Oh my God," she muttered, lifting the slippers like they were disease samples. "Did you make these?" I nodded. "You said your feet were cold. They're lamb's wool lined." She cut me off. "I said it in Aspen, not here. I don't need handmade farm shoes in this house." Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. It sliced just the same. Her husband chuckled behind his mug. "Old habits, huh?" Then she dropped them, literally dropped them, back to the floor and sneered. "Who told you to wear striped slippers to the breakfast table? This isn't a soup kitchen. If you're going to bring garage couture in here, maybe wear it out there." The room fell silent. Even the boys stopped slurping. She kept talking, louder now, as if trying to drown something out. "Honestly, Mom, it's weird. You keep trying to insert these pathetic little gifts, like we're still living in some dusty farmhouse with chickens in the yard. But this is my home. My space. And these," she kicked the slippers with her heel, "don't belong." I stood still. My hands were wet from washing dishes, and I didn't bother drying them. I looked down at the slippers. One had landed upside down, showing the stitching. I could still see where I pricked my finger sewing the side seam, the faintest dot of blood, invisible to anyone but me. My daughter turned back to her coffee. Her husband resumed scrawling. The boys looked at me, wide-eyed. I bent down, slowly. My knees ached. I picked them up, not like a servant, not like a thief, like a woman retrieving something sacred from a place it never should have been dropped. I didn't cry, not then. I simply walked to the laundry room and placed them gently in the basket of clean towels under a folded sheet. Some things deserved softness, even if the world forgot how to give it. Back in the kitchen, no one spoke to me. They moved on. Her husband laughed at something on his phone. The boys resumed eating. She took a call and walked away. And I stood there, in my own daughter's home, feeling like an intruder in a life I helped build. A week later, I noticed she had bought cashmere slippers from a boutique downtown, nearly identical in shape, just without my thread, my hours, or my heart. She showed them off to a friend during brunch. "These are imported, limited run, hand-stitched by this designer who only makes 12 pairs a year." She said it proudly, like she had discovered the concept of warmth, all by herself. I said nothing, but I remembered every word, every syllable she ever dropped, like glass onto my spine. Sometimes people think cruelty only hurts when it shouts, but I have learned the truth. It is the whispers, the mockery wrapped in silk, that make you question your own worth. But I didn't break. Not because I was strong, but because I knew I wasn't done yet. I had started to keep notes, dates, words, moments, not out of spite but out of survival, because memory was the only dignity I had left in this house. And one day, they would ask me what happened, and I would have answers. That night, I took the slippers back out from under the towels. I folded them neatly, wrapped them in tissue, placed them back in my trunk alongside the documents and investment records. I wasn't sure why, but something told me they belonged there. Maybe not as a gift, but as a reminder that what you make with your hands means something, even when people treat it like nothing. Especially then. It was a Wednesday when my room was taken from me. They had company coming, they said. Out-of-town relatives for some family reunion I had not been asked about. The house would be full, bustling with cousins I had not met in years, and friends of the family whose names I could no longer place. Lily, my daughter, was bustling with excitement, arranging catering and hiring a decorator to transform the living room into some kind of southern rustic vision. I stayed out of the way. I always did. I helped polish the silver, laid out the napkins, and dusted the windowsills. I didn't need a place at the table, just a place to rest. That evening, after dinner, Lily's husband, Mark, cleared his throat. "So, Nadine," he began, the way someone might begin breaking bad news to a dog. The guest rooms are filling up fast. We're going to have to do a little reorganization. I looked up from the crossword puzzle I was working on. Of course, let me know how I can help. He hesitated. Then my daughter stepped in. Her smile was tight. Mom, we're giving your room to Aunt Carla and Uncle Dean. You'll be in the garage. I knew how cold Nebraska nights could drop below freezing. They did not scare me. What scared me more was the words that had already done their work. The pencil slipped from my fingers. I blinked. The garage? It's just for a few nights, she said quickly, her voice firm, like she had rehearsed it. We'll put a cot in there. You'll have space. Quiet. It won't be too bad. I tried to breathe. But the garage, it's not insulated. It gets to 30 degrees at night. Mark interjected, this time without any pretense. Still warm enough to keep from freezing, Nadine. I looked at them, my daughter, my son-in-law, and in that moment I saw not family, but strangers who had mistaken my silence for weakness for too many years. But I'm not a guest, I said, almost to myself. That's why we're asking, Lily replied. It's family. We make sacrifices. Then came the worst part. The soft voice of my daughter-in-law from behind me, carrying a sharpness wrapped in sugar. Honestly, she said, sometimes discomfort is good. Reminds us what's worth holding on to. If it's a little cold, maybe that'll be enough to curb any ideas of overstaying. She smiled, as if that were clever, like it was some sort of joke, but it wasn't. It was an exile. In my own house. Before I could answer, I felt a small hand brush against mine. My granddaughter, Ellie, stood next to me, her face pale, eyes wide with confusion. She opened her mouth as if to say something, anything, but her father, my son, tugged her away by the wrist. Come on, Elle, grown-up talk. She looked over her shoulder as she walked down the hall, eyes locked with mine, and in that glance, I saw the unspoken apology of a child too young to stop cruelty, but old enough to recognize it. Later that night, I sat on the cot in the garage, wrapped in an old quilt. The walls were unpainted. The floor was hard concrete. A water heater hissed every few minutes, like a whisper, reminding me I was not supposed to belong here. I stared at the ceiling, counting the gaps in the insulation, and realized there were none. Because there was no insulation at all. They gave me a cot. No heater, no bedside table, no lamp. There was a single extension cord running from the wall to a battery-operated lantern that flickered like it too wanted to leave. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I sat still listening to the muffled laughter from inside the house, the soft music, the clinking glasses. My room, the one with the handmade quilt I sewed 30 years ago, was occupied by people who never asked my name. That night I remembered something my grandmother used to say. When people forget your worth, do not argue, just leave the table. But don't forget to take the silverware with you. So I reached under the cot, to the same suitcase I had packed and repacked 100 times in my head over the years. My documents, the plans, the bank statements, the video files. I checked them again, not because I doubted, but because I knew the time was getting close. They had taken my room, but they had not taken everything. And I was done waiting to be offered crumbs. I would speak, but not yet. Soon. Very soon. I told them it was about the house, that I was getting older, that taxes were complicated, that I didn't want to die and leave a mess, that the time had come to arrange things properly. The word inheritance always got their attention. I scheduled the meeting at the notary's office, neutral ground, free of floral wallpaper and judgmental eyes. I made sure they all got the invitation in gold-letter envelopes. Lily and her husband Mark, my son Todd, his wife Jenna, even Ellie, who was finally old enough to wear high heels and frown like her mother. They showed up early. That's how I knew they thought it was about money. Mark wore a suit. Lily smiled too wide. Jenna had brought baked goods. The notary, a tall, thin woman named Grace with a steely professionalism, welcomed them with practiced warmth. She motioned to the polished conference table where folders lay neatly stacked. I sat at the head. Thank you all for coming, I said, hands folded. This won't take long. Lily leaned forward. We just want what's best for you, Mom, truly. Mark nodded. If simplifying things now avoids a mess later, it's wise. I smiled. That's exactly what I thought. Grace opened the first folder. Per Mrs. Nadine's instructions, she said, we are here to certify and witness the signing of a property transfer document. But before we proceed, Mrs. Nadine has requested to read a personal statement aloud. I stood. Every eye turned to me. I held the paper in my hands, but I didn't need to read it. I knew every word. I've spent the last 12 years pretending not to hear what you said behind my back, I began, my voice low but steady. I pretended not to hear when you called me a burden, when you mocked my cooking, when you whispered that I'd lost my mind. I pretended not to notice when you took my room, laughed at my clothes, dismissed my love, erased my name from family photos. Lily shifted. Mark's jaw tensed. Jenna blinked, confused. I continued. I was quiet not because I was blind, but because I was watching. And because I was building. Building something none of you ever asked about. Something you all assumed I was too old, too simple, too irrelevant to manage. I looked at Grace and nodded. She pulled out a separate folder, one none of them had seen before, and began reading. I had turned small savings into something far greater, quiet investments, a hidden portfolio. What they called just Grandma's stash became enough to change everything. By the authority of the state of Nebraska and in the presence of legal witnesses, Mrs. Nadine hereby declares the transfer of all assets totaling $11,300,000 0 cents, including property, investments, and savings, Lily gasped. To Miss Lan Pham, Grace continued, the sole beneficiary named in this irrevocable living trust. It was like a time split. Lily leapt to her feet. Who the hell is Lan? I turned to her. Lan is the only person in that house who ever asked me if I was hungry. She's the maid, Mark barked. This is insane. She is kind, I replied. She remembers my birthday. She folds my laundry with lavender. She offered me soup when you left me in the garage with no heat. Jenna looked around, trying to understand what was happening. Todd's eyes went wide. Ellie's mouth fell open. But the house, Mom, that's our family home, Lily shouted. It was my home, I said, until you turned it into a showroom. You can't just give it all away, Mark growled. We've put years into managing your things. You mean managing me? I corrected. And I no longer require your management. Grace slid the papers forward. It is all legally binding, she confirmed. Witnessed, notarized, and recorded. There is no revocation clause. Todd slammed his hand on the table. Mom, please, let's talk about this. This is family. I turned to him. You didn't say that when you pulled Ellie away from me, when you stood silent as your wife sent me to the garage. He went pale. Ellie whispered, Grandma. I softened my voice. You are young, my dear, and I hope one day you'll understand what it costs to stay silent. Lily was crying now, ugly, red-faced tears. You're ruining everything. For what? A woman who wipes countertops? No, I said. For a woman who saw me. Mark looked at Grace. This isn't over. Grace raised a brow. Legally, it is. I stood and placed the original statement in my folder. I asked you all here not to punish you, I said, but to finally speak after 12 years of pretending. I don't need your approval. I needed the truth to leave my lips while I was still alive. Lily sobbed. I was trying my best. You were trying to inherit, I said gently, and you failed to love. I walked out of the room, my spine straight, my eyes dry, and I have never looked back. I entered the notary's room that morning, carrying nothing but my quiet resolve and a sealed envelope the size of every insult I had saved for 12 years. The table before me was polished and reflective, guests seated in stiff chairs, Lily, Mark, Todd, Jenna, even Ellie, who sat clutching her phone, as if afraid it would disappear. Grace the notary cleared her throat, folding her hands over the document in front of her. The air smelled clean, sterile, like expectations waiting to be rewritten. Lily leaned forward. Mom, we appreciate how organized you are. I raised a hand. Before any signatures are made, I have one final thing to show you all. Grace's face softened. Of course. I nodded to her, and she pressed play on the video. The first frame showed Lily's voice, tinged with contempt, whispering as if no one else could hear. She's useless. She doesn't know how we live now. Then the camera switched to Todd, saying, I don't know why she's still here. She doesn't contribute, and she drains our dignity. I felt the floor still under my feet, but my heart was very still. The video continued, edited seamlessly by me in quiet hours when they did not think I was watching. Lily mocking my cooking. You'd think we live in a barn. My outings to the market. Her accent makes us sound like backwoods. My clothes. She dresses like someone stuck in the 50s. Mark, laughing with his friends. She's dead weight, I swear. Every word, every sneer recorded. The room turned colder. Lily's mouth parted. Mark's hand froze over his wineglass. Jenna's cheeks flamed pink. Ellie's eyes welled. It was public humiliation, but not without purpose. Each word was a mirror, held under fluorescent lights. Silence filled the room, heavy and unbroken. Grace paused the video and looked at me. I have something to say, I said, voice steady. You all expected a signature today, maybe a gesture of goodwill. But goodwill was paid forward years ago, when I raised you with love, when I stitched your dresses, when I gave you every ounce of me. I stood taller. Now, all you see is a ghost, but I am very much alive. Lily's voice cracked. How could you do this? I did not do this. You did this, I replied. Every word was collected so that when I finally spoke, it would matter. Todd rose. This is cruel, Mom. This is accountability, I corrected softly. Mark looked at Grace. Is this legal? Grace exhaled. Yes. In our state, one-party recording is allowed, as long as it's not manipulated to mislead. It had not been. It was raw and real. Lily sank back into her chair. Jenna dropped her gaze. Todd clenched his fist but said nothing. Ellie stood. Grandma, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I watched her go, my heart cracking, but also healing, because real healing begins when truth is no longer denied. I walked out of the room. I had held my silence long enough. Now there's no room left for echoes of mockery, only the truth, and the sound of new steps taken in the light. They thought the story had ended when I walked out of the notary's office. They stared at the door, mouths slightly open, not daring to hope I'd remain gone. For a moment, they returned to their shocks and excuses, until the nightly local news broke their silence. An exclusive. The legacy fund founded in love and defiance. The camera panned to the small office above the antique store, where Lan, our former housekeeper, stood beside me. We were both in simple dresses, my hair tied back, not a hint of regret in my eyes. Lan spoke first. Mr. and Mrs. Turner, they asked me to pass along Mrs. Nadine's message. She held back tears. Mrs. Nadine has created the Legacy Fund to support women over 60 who have been abandoned or left behind. She wants them to receive housing, caregiving, companionship, because no one should ever say they don't matter. My daughter's face was on the screen. She looked pale. Mark's jaw was slack. Todd and Jenna had their hands over their mouths. Ellie watched with wide eyes. The interviewer leaned forward. Why her, Mrs. Nadine? I looked at Lan. She was told she was garbage, that she didn't belong, but then she gave her life to building something here, so that's what this fund is. Memory turned into action. The news anchor ended with, in a world that applauds revenge, this woman chose gratitude. Her legacy begins tonight. It trended immediately. Nadine Legacy started to flood social media. People shared stories of elderly mothers and aunts forgotten in nursing homes, of daughters who left, of quiet sacrifices unrecognized. Advocacy groups, charities, even local businesses reached out to help locate eligible women. Meanwhile, my family's phone blew up, but not in kindness. Lily posted live on richgirlfashion.com, tears streaming. Mom, please, this was supposed to be about the house. I'm so sorry. Below, comments flooded in. How do you apologize when you stole her dignity? Actions speak louder than forgiveness. Nadine gave her fortune to help others. What she gave your mother was teaching her empathy. I didn't respond. I stayed off social media. I let my silence follow their practically empty apologies, live in the void where kindness used to be. One day, my phone rang. It was the director of a women's... Nadine, I don't know if you'll remember me. My name is Helen Thompson. When I was a girl, you once visited our town fair to judge the pumpkin entries. You spent time with my grandmother afterward, even though no one else did. You told me, every seed has a soul. God forgive me for forgetting that. She began to sob softly. This fund, this kindness, means everything to me, and the women will know they matter. That night I sat alone in my rocking chair. A letter arrived. Inside, in a shaky hand, were these words: "Thank you for giving me back my pride, a friend." I folded it carefully and placed it in a box where I kept the wooden box of records. I thought again of the words I once taught Ellie when she was learning to whittle wood with me. Kindness is stronger than sharp edges. It turned out to be true. In the following weeks, our town held a fundraising walk, Steps for Legacy. Over 2,000 people showed up, wearing ribbons the color of wheat and sunrise. My grandsons marched, their heads held high. They passed by me, waving, and I realized they now knew I was their grandmother. Not the older woman forced into the garage, but the one who kept her promise to build more than a home. One evening, I stood on my porch as the sky turned lavender. Banjo lay beside my rocking chair, old now, but loyal as ever. I whispered, "We did good." He wagged his tail. I closed my eyes, breathing in the cockpit of the farm, more full than any living room gathering I remembered. The next day, I placed a simple sign on the gate: Legacy House, built on love. It wasn't grand, but it was honest. And I'd learned that real legacy isn't inherited, it's given. One life, one sacrifice, one moment of remembering that we all matter. I never wanted to be a headline, but here I am, welcomed as something bigger than I ever imagined. The house stands quietly on our plot of land, sun-warmed and open. I've repaired the squeak in the front gate, planted wildflowers in the old wooden planters, and repainted the door a soft sage green. I call it my legacy studio. It's part sewing workshop, part gathering place, part safe harbor. Every morning, I hear footsteps along the gravel, women in their 60s, 70s, 80s, coming to learn what I once wove in the silence of necessity. They bring their stories, their calloused hands, their abandoned hope. I teach them how to thread a needle, how to mend seams, how to believe in something again. I call us artists in everyday life. They call me the real artisan, a phrase I never understood until I lived it. They ripple with pride, wearing small pins that read Legacy Maker. And some nights, when laughter echoes through the open windows, I catch a glimpse of light in their eyes, light that has nothing to do with the sun and everything to do with rediscovery. The local newspapers come sometimes, three-piece suits and cameras, but they don't disrupt. Instead, they stay quiet, capturing the softness of the moment, the river beyond the workshop, the pollen dust that drifts in gold motes, the women bent over sewing machines like they are writing sentences with thread. The comments I read afterward: "She taught me courage. My daughter now sees me. I bought joy today." Heavy gratitude pressed itself across my heart more fiercely than confrontation ever could. One evening, Lon, the woman who always asked if I was cold or hungry, leaned in and whispered, "You are the woman I have admired all my life." I nodded, blinking back tears. She had never revealed how much she saw, how her own life had been shaped by silent kindness. So, in equal understatement, I said, "And you are my greatest faithful witness." She pressed my hand and walked away before I could say more. The sun was setting when I finally stepped onto my porch, my legacy studio behind me, neat rows of wildflowers ahead. Banjo, older and cuddlier than ever, patted beside me. The air smelled of hay and new paint and possibilities. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and settled into the wrought iron chair. The Omaha sky melted into peach and plum, Nebraska's earned grace. In that moment, I did not feel old. I felt like what I had always been, someone who endured, someone who whispered the truth in a world that shouted lies, someone who built instead of colluded. I thought again of the nights I stood in the garage, the humiliation, the hunger for belonging. I thought of Lily's words, of the slippers, of the room they'd taken, of the notary point of notary. But most of all, I thought of this: the echo of laughter, the hum of sewing, the quiet dignity of women, learning that their worth was real. No, there are no fireworks now. There are no grand speeches, applause, or orchestrated fanfare. There is something much rarer. There is peace, and purpose, and being seen. Because a star doesn't need to burn the brightest to guide the way. It just needs to stay being itself. I closed my eyes. Nebraska twilight wrapped around me like a benediction, and I let myself rest in the glow. At last, I was not a discarded acre or a painful memory. I was the heart of a story that would outlive me. And that was more than enough. And so, in the quiet corners of Nebraska, where dignity was once mistaken for silence, a woman named Nadine became something more than a mother, more than a widow, more than the background of someone else's life. She became the author of her own legacy. If this story reminded you of someone who waited too long to be heard, or if you simply believe that no soul should ever be treated like a burden, then let this not be the end. Tap that subscribe button to follow Grandma True Stories, where forgotten voices finally speak, where wisdom whispers louder than pride, and where is justice takes its time. Because every grandma has a story, and some of them are just getting started.